For those of you who are joining us, The Zone of Genius is based on the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, Conquer Your Hidden Fear and Take Life to the Next Level. And the concept is, the premise is that Zone of Genius is those inherent skills and abilities, those things you could do all day long. And when you do more of that, you're actually happier and people actually like you more because you're doing what you love. And it has some pretty impactful outcomes. That's why I use it in everything that I do. And in the book, he talks about there's only one problem that you need to solve to spend more time in your zone of genius. And so therefore, there's only one skill to learn. And who would like to explain ULP for our audience?
I could take that if need be. I would just say that based on our discussion, our upper limit problem is essentially just one obstacle that holds us back from achieving your full potential, to simply put it.
Right. Right. So do we do it consciously?
No, it's, oh, sorry, go on, Chris.
No, you got it.
I was just going to say it's an unconscious thing that basically is set really early on in our lives. So, from kind of being a young kid, there's certain temperatures, if you will, that trip your upper limit problems, and kind of are based on your fears and false beliefs that really are holding that upper limit problem in place. So there's 5 different ones that it could potentially be. And they're the fear of being, or the barrier 1 could be feeling fundamentally flawed. Barrier 2, disloyalty and abandonment. Barrier 3, believing that more success brings a bigger burden. Barrier 4, the crime of outshining. And barrier 5, scarcity and unworthiness. So that upper limit problem, once you figure out what it is, you need to focus on it and kind of bring that awareness to it so that you can get rid of it and dissolve it.
Right. So the skill to learn then is to identify and transcend your upper limit problem. Smoking it out, right? Oh, there it is. And we have been working on identifying, your upper limit problem, the various zones. What would be something that you want to share with other people that was really impactful for you as you've been getting exposed to the zone of genius?
I think for myself, so much of it, what we were working on last week in terms of mapping out both what our zone of genius is based on values, based on kind of what we feel is important to us and what we're trying to develop. So much of that is interconnected, but especially with things going on with COVID, with things just life being so busy, being able to make those connections is so important. So taking the time to actually walk through the process.
Yeah, it's all connected. And when you start with your values, right? Your values are your North Star. He's here. Okay, sorry. Okay. Okay, so welcome, Gay Hendricks. I'm Maura Lethbridge. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Maura.
Oh, all right, everybody. I am so excited to introduce you to Dr. Gay Hendricks. I'm going to read his bio, and then, Gay, I'm going to do an introduction of me and the students, and then we're going to jump right in because the questions they've come up with, woohoo! I hope you ate your Wheaties today.
Yeah, I just had a cup of espresso, too, so I'm ready to go.
Great. Wonderful. Okay. Dr. Gay Hendricks has been a leader in the fields of relationship transformation and body-mind transformation for more than 45 years. After earning his PhD from Stanford in 1974, Gay served as professor of counseling psychology at the University of Colorado for 21 years. He's written more than 40 books. Wow. Including the bestsellers such as Five Wishes, The Big Leap, Conscious Loving, and Conscious Loving Ever After. And the last two he co-authored with his co-author and mate for more than 35 years, Dr. Kathleen Hendricks. That's so, wow, very cool. He's also a mystery novelist. What? And you have a series of 5 books featuring Tibetan Buddhist private detective Tenzing Norbu, as well as a new mystery series featuring a Victorian-era London detective, Sir Errol Hyde. You're like, wow. And your latest book, Conscious Luck, reveals 8 ways to change your fortunes through the power of intention. Yummy. Gay has appeared on more than 500 radio and TV shows, including Oprah, CNN, CNBC, 48 Hours, and others. Round of applause. Welcome, Gay. Yay!
I'm glad to be with you. By the way, I forgot to look. What part of the world are you guys in today?
Well, we have University of Richmond is in Richmond, Virginia, but we have people in Canada and all across the States and Mexico.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
I'm Maura Lethbridge, and I have to be honest. I am a huge fan.
Thank you.
If you couldn't tell, I have been using your books in my coaching and consulting business for years, and your work is transforming people's lives for the better. It's really amazing. I am the MBA executive in residence and adjunct professor at the University of Richmond in the Robbins School of Business. I advise MBA students and alumni. And the first thing I did when I came here was I bought several copies so that every time that I meet with a student, I give them a copy. And together we discover their zone of genius. And when the school asked me about teaching, I pitched this leadership course, Lead from Your Zone of Genius. And the reason is because I've watched how I've transformed, how my clients have transformed, and now these students, oh my gosh. And what I've watched is, people, they're like, oh, they like relax into this, I don't know, this deep knowing of their own innate skills and abilities. And now is such an important time to have really genuine and effective leaders. And they're here. I'm so excited that they're going to interview you. Now, there's also other MBA students and faculty and guests who are really excited to be here with you. And so here's a little bit about the course. The primary objective is that these students develop a pragmatic definition of leadership, and that they identify their innate skills and abilities and lead from their zone of genius. And what questions do you have of me before we begin with the questions?
Well, I don't really have any questions. I love to talk about this particular subject, and I talk about it on 50 different platforms every week, probably. So this is just a new way for me to have the conversation that I love to have. Back in 1977, when I had just started as a university professor, I had been about, I started there in 74. So I'd been a professor in the counseling psychology department at the University of Colorado for about 3 years. And things were going okay, but I had this one breakthrough day where I was on my way home back to my apartment, and I was listening on the radio, and someone was interviewing an author, and he said this one thing, and I still to this day don't know who it was because I got home before I learned who the author was. But what he was talking about was that he said that most human misery comes from the lack of having a worthwhile purpose that feels good to you and also contributes to the world. And there was something in that question. I realized, I've done everything that you can do in the educational establishment. I've gotten my master's and I got my PhD, and I've even written a couple of books already. But I realized that I didn't know what the real purpose, that was the why behind everything I was doing. And so I actually went home and I sat down in my apartment and I spent about an hour just saying, what I call doing wonder questions like, what is the purpose of my life? And it came to me in that moment that the purpose of all our lives is to do what we're most skilled at doing, what is in our zone of genius. I didn't have that language for it at the time, but the idea that came down to me at the time was that we all have this thing within us that we're driven to bring forth. And if we can bring that forth, what I call your genius, then you get a degree of satisfaction that is very uncommon in life, that's very hard to get otherwise. And so since 1977, when I figured this out, I've really locked in on my purpose, which I talk about in The Big Leap, which is that my life, the purpose of my life, is to expand every day in love, abundance, creativity, and success at the same time that I'm inspiring other people who are interested to do the same. So that's what I'm doing at this very moment. We're talking here, and that's what I began to do in 1977. And in my own life, I realized when I first realized this that I was spending only about 10% of my time in my genius zone. And I had a lot of work to do. So you saw some of the story in The Big Leap, but I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk to you tomorrow. I'm talking on an Irish radio station for an hour, and the day after that I'm talking on an Australian and Indian thing. And so wherever I get the opportunity to show up and talk about this particular subject, I'm happy to do it. And also, because I do 50 or 100 interviews a year, it's kept The Big Leap on the bestseller list for the past 10 years, which is always a good thing for an author.
Woohoo! Yes. Yes. Well, I'm doing my part to keep you on the bestseller list by buying several copies all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. What I'd like to do next is to have the students introduce themselves, and then they have done their homework and they're going to ask the questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you all.
Thanks, Maura. Hi, I'm Morgan, and I have a couple of questions on the mind and body connection. So my first one is, how has your work in breathing exercises tied into teaching others about achieving their zone of genius?
A great question. Right now, for example, this afternoon at this same time, my wife is starting to teach our basic 3-day training, although now we're doing it virtually, so we spread it out over 8 weeks. But we're starting a new group of people this afternoon. She's over in another office while I'm here. And so everything we do is oriented around the body-mind connection. And I always say body-mind rather than mind-body because the body was here first. And we were functioning really well for millions of years, and then we developed this amazing cerebral cortex that is the latest thing in brain evolution. And that has a great power to it, but it also has a great handicap to it unless we're careful. The great power of the human mind is that we can create ideas, we can build skyscrapers, we can compose symphonies, and we can also use those same patterns of mind to make ourselves colossally miserable. So we have to be very mindful when we're opening up the powers of our mind to make sure that the powers of our mind are in harmony with our body. Because a lot of people tend to use their mind at war with their body. They have a feeling like they feel sad, and their mind kicks in and says, big boys don't cry. And so we squash it. Or you feel scared, and your mind kicks in with an old thing from childhood about, don't be scared. There's nothing to be scared about. So a lot of times we can get this kind of a adversarial relationship with our minds. And so our work is about learning to harmonize your mind and your body so that you're using your mind in harmony with what's going on below your neck. Really, practically speaking, a lot of work has to do with learning how to spot and speak about your emotions in a clear, straightforward way. Like Katie and I, well, she mentioned Conscious Loving, the book that we were first on Oprah with 30 years ago. We were at the beginning of a kind of a revolution in couples work, where we kind of junked a lot of the old ideas and we started putting a lot of new ideas to work. And a lot of the new ideas do have to do with learning how to be in touch with your body so that, for example, there was this one turning point day in my relationship with Katie that goes back probably, well, we've been together 40 years now, so this probably goes back 38 years. There was this one moment where we were in some kind of a little hassle with each other, and we were criticizing each other for something. And I've forgotten the details at the moment, but the download for me was I realized, oh, I'm arguing with her. I'm criticizing her, which sounds like I'm angry, but what I'm really feeling inside is afraid. I was able to identify the difference between fear and sadness and anger, and I realized, my voice sounds angry, but my body is actually feeling scared. And so in this moment, I just blurted out, I'm scared. And I don't know why, but I'm arguing with you, and part of me sounds angry, but what I really am is scared. And so Katie asked me, oh, okay, what are you scared about? And as I tuned into it, I realized, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to lose you. And we were only a couple of years into our relationship, but I think this fear had awakened that things were going so great and I was having such a connection with her that I'd never had before. It brought up this fear that I was going to lose it. I just almost knocked my head off here. But in that moment, I got into harmony where my mind and my body connected up, and I realized, oh, all I really have to do is just tell people exactly the truth of what I'm feeling inside. It's as simple as that. And so we developed a lot of practices around how to be honest with each other in relationships, and that caused huge controversies. I can remember even on talk shows, when we'd be on some talk show, somebody would inevitably stand up in the audience and say, I've been lying to my husband every day for 29 years and we're still together. And the audience would go, yay. And so Katie and I would sometimes look at each other and say, what planet are we on here anyway? And but in our society, it's commonplace for people to conceal their feelings from each other. And that's a big problem that we in our mind-body work strive to overcome by helping people feel down into what's real in themselves so that they can be honest with themselves and with other people at any given moment in business, in relationship, wherever you happen to be. Honesty truly is the best policy.
That's great. And would you say that there are any sort of subconscious ways that our bodies let us know that we're operating in different zones?
Yes. Well, in one of my later books that's not out actually till I have a book called The Genius Zone that's out in the spring. And in it, I quote from the Gospel of Thomas, which was one of the apocryphal Gospels that got edited out of the final official Bible, but it has some very good stuff in it. One thing in it says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you. And it's such a key point because I think we all have something to say here, something to contribute here. And if we can find out what is it inside ourselves that's most important for us to contribute, we get to feel healthy at a level that hardly ever any other way to feel healthy in. And just on a practical note, I haven't had a cold or the flu in 25 years. And because I spend my time in my zone of genius. And so I don't think people get sick when they're zone of genius. I mean, eventually my body's going to wear out, or I'll get hit by a bus, or something's going to happen. But the actual, in my view, the ticket to your health has to do with bringing forth what is within you, the important things that are you're able to bring forth. I hope I'm answering your question. Sometimes I get a little carried away and go off on tangents, but if I've overlooked something, please bring me back to home.
No, that's
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. That actually leads kind of nicely into a question I had. So you had mentioned in the section on the zone of competence that when people aren't expressing their full potential, they can get illnesses with vague, hard to diagnose symptoms, such as chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, that kind of thing. And it was really interesting to me because I was recently diagnosed with fibromyalgia myself, just on a personal note. So I was just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that. You had referenced Joan and the competence trap, but I was just curious if you had any more examples or research that you conducted on that topic.
Yes. Well, I started working with mind-body symptoms way back in the 70s, mostly working with headache and back pain. And we found that with certain kinds of headache and back pain, you didn't really need to take medication for them. There's a gentleman who just passed away a few years ago named John Sarno, Sarno. He's a medical doctor, and for many years he was at the Rusk Rehab Institute in New York, and he treated thousands of people for headache and back pain without medication, even though he was a medical doctor. And guess how he did it? He did it by teaching people how to get in touch with and express their emotions, primarily anger, because anger has a lot to do with back pain and headache, because when you're angry, you clamp down on muscles that are up and down the spine and the back of the neck, and it interferes with circulation, and then things get tweaked. And so there's a tremendous amount of research on that now that wasn't there some years ago. But thanks to John Sarno, he was the first person to kind of make that breakthrough and to develop a whole practice out of working with people in a non-pharmaceutical kind of way. And as you might imagine, he didn't get a lot of support from the pharmaceutical companies about that. But fibromyalgia is a classic example of one of those kinds of diseases that I'm talking about that that I believe have a lot to do with getting stuck in your zone of competence or incompetence, having to do too many things that you fundamentally don't like doing. And so you might look into some of those kinds of questions as you're beginning to work with this, because this often with things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue is another classic one. Chronic fatigue, any of the kind of hard to diagnose things that don't fit into a regular category. Like you probably went to a lot of trouble before you finally got this diagnosis, because a lot of you go, it's common to go around and try to figure out what the heck is going on. And everybody's got a solution to it, whether you're a podiatrist or a chiropractor or whatever, they've all got their way of working with it. But for now, I would recommend that you kind of take the John Sarno approach and learn as much about it as you can and find out, did it come on at a time when I was going through a lot of emotional stress, and does it come on in times when I'm feeling especially vulnerable? In 12-step work, they have an acronym, HALT, HALT. And what it means is when these four things happen, stop, because they're pushing you in the direction of taking a drink or whatever your particular addiction is. But H stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. When you get HALT, one of those four things, pause for a moment and am I doing what I'm doing out of anger? Am I doing what I'm doing out of loneliness or fatigue? Or is it because I'm hungry? My wife, bless her heart, it took her a few years to spot this, but I don't do well when I get hungry. If I'm ever going to kind of be short with people or snap or something like that at somebody, it's usually because it's been 4 or 5 hours since I've eaten something. And so she's helped me learn how to have a little snack or something every couple of hours so I don't ever get that kind of wilted feeling inside. Sometimes it has to do with those kinds of things, but there would give you HALT, would give you the first 4 places to look for sure.
Gay, I have to tell you about, I added 3 S's onto HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick, scared, and stressed. So, because those can also trigger it.
Well, right now, this is all very much on my mind because I'm planning a new breathing master course for later on in the winter, and so I've been beginning now to go through all the latest mind-body research that's come up over the past few years. Here's something interesting. When I first proposed writing a book on breathing, which came out 25 years ago, Conscious Breathing, we had just had this big monster hit with Conscious Loving and been on Oprah and all the talk shows and everything. And so I had, for 15 years, wanted to write a whole book about breathing. And I'll never forget the look on my editor's face because I came back to New York and they asked me, okay, what do you want to do next? You know, I was the golden boy. Katie and I were in their office and they're all around and around. And I said, well, what I really want to do is write a book about breathing. And everybody goes, yeah. Because at the time, the whole mind-body thing hadn't been really well established. But let me tell you something. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine went to the American Medical Association conference down in, I think it was Fort Lauderdale, and called me up very excitedly and said, guess what? A third of the workshops that are being offered down here are on body-mind things like breathing and yoga and other kinds of what I call new dimension things that take you into your body in a whole new way. That tickled me pink because to come from a place where nobody wanted to even talk about breathing to a place where people were at the medical association, you know, the height of conservativeness, that if they were doing it, it really gave me a lot of heart.
Thank you so much for answering.
My pleasure. Good luck with all of that.
Thank you.
So I could take the next question. So this kind of moves on to the upper limit problem, which we talked about briefly before you joined. But in the book, he talks about how your capacity for enjoyment expands, and as a result, so does the creativity you feel and the love you express, etc. So I was just wondering, other than consciously enjoying like the things we have, are there any other ways that you have kind of either learned or experienced to help expand our capacity in certain areas?
The best place to begin any kind of self-change program is actually to begin by centering yourself in gratitude for what you already have. That just kind of clears the space for it. Because if you want to manifest something new in your life, it's not as powerful if you do it to remedy something that happened in the past. It's good if you just start from a clean slate. So the place to start from is, I believe, a place of gratitude, because there are many things to be grateful for, even if you're in a bad mood. Just think, for example, that you and I and all of us are the only, there's 8.9 million species on the planet. And you and I are in the only one that can have a conversation about this, about the big leap. And that's an amazing thing to feel grateful for. And so to just ground ourselves in gratitude is a super important thing. The second component of any kind of self-change program, though, is commitment. So gratitude and commitment are the starting places, I believe, for a powerful new way to change your life. So pick a particular area. Let's say you want to lose weight, or pick an area you want to increase your cash flow, you want to increase your net worth. Committing to that is the starting place, making a sincere commitment to it. In the Big Leap, and also in this new book, The Genius Zone, that'll be out in the spring, I talk a lot about the power of commitment, because I've probably had over the years close to 5,000 married couples in here, and none of them came in to tell me what a good time they were having. They all came in because they were having some kind of a problem. I would love to have a couple come in sometime and say, Dr. Hendricks, we just wanted to make an appointment to tell you how great things are going. And I keep waiting for that. But of those 5,000 or so people, one of the main things that was hanging them up was one or both people were still not committed to the relationship, even though they might have been in it for 20 years. That one person or the other had their foot out the back door all the time, and may have even gotten into the relationship with their foot already in the back, out the back door. And I see heads nodding. You've probably been in relationships like that. I always say one of the reasons I'm a good relationship expert is because up until the age of 34, when I met my wife, Katie, I made every relationship mistake that was possible to make in the entire field of relationship misery. And so I feel qualified. So I've seen the other side of it. So I think any area of life you pick that you want to initiate change in, gratitude and commitment are the places to really start from. And both of them are absolutely free. They don't require a coach. They don't require a therapist. It's between you and the universe, whether you commit to something or not.
Well, thank you very much. And I didn't introduce myself. I'm Chris, by the way. But
Hey, Chris.
that resonated very much with me in a lot of areas. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Good. And where are you today?
I'm I'm just outside of Richmond in a town called Henrico. So about 5 minutes from the campus.
Right. Is University of Richmond, is it a private school or a public school?
It is private, yes.
Private school?
Yeah.
So I'll go next. Hi, my name is John Fitzgerald. Thanks for being with us today. So my question is, in chapter 1, with your example with Dr. Jordan, where he pretty much thought he was worth less than the offer of $3 million, I thought it was interesting because, like, yes, it's very important to be confident in yourself, but I've also been told that it's important to have humility. And I'm just wondering, in regards to the zone of genius, what's the right balance between confidence and humility?
That's a really good point. Well, one thing, first of all, I think it's really important to have that balance of confidence and humility, to be always in the spirit of wanting to go all the way to your full zone of genius, to your full capabilities, and also being at ease with however it goes, because you're always going to go through lots of twists and turns until you get there. One of the main things that I think, especially if you're young like you guys are, by the way, I should tell you, I'm 75 now. And so when I look at you guys, it's hard for me to tell whether you're teenagers or 20 or 30 or what. Everybody under about 40 looks like a teenager to me now. So I can't tell what stage of life are you in. How old are you?
I'm 22.
Okay. The reason I ask that is because in developmental psychology, we break it down into decades. The decade of the 20s is for experimentation, to try on a bunch of different things, to, look at all different aspects of life, to savor a lot of different things. Your 30s, we say in your 20s, you experiment. In your 30s, you find your life. In your 40s, you build your life. What you're doing now at 22 is important to open up yourself to more and more experience and not close down things. Like the great poet Rilke said, learn to love the questions. Don't be so focused on the answers, but open up and learn to love the questions. Open up and find out what your big questions are. For another person, we might have, wave me a hand if you're in your 30s. Anybody there in your 30s? I can't see all of you, but anyway, your 30s are about finding your life in the sense that oftentimes in your 30s, you kind of lock in and say, okay, this is what I most want to do. And you begin to orient yourself more in that direction. I was in my 30s when I first discovered the whole package of things that's in the Big Leap. That was one of my huge learnings in my 30s. And I began to put together all of that then. Then in my 40s was when we began to move out into the world. I remember, I think I was 40 something, 42, let's see. I was around 45, I think, when we first got on Oprah and started doing big time shows and things like that and had bestsellers. Up until then, I was really enjoying being a university professor. And then one night, Katie and I, we were working with 10 couples in our living room. And afterward, we were sitting in front of the fireplace and we say, we really ought to take this stuff. This stuff really works. We ought to take it out into a bigger stadium. And so that's when we got the call from Oprah, was after that. And I always say we went overnight from working with 10 couples in our living room to working with 10 million people on television. And since then, we've been around the world 30 some times teaching our seminars. And what I've discovered is that in every culture, they pretty much work the same way. There's differences, in between people in India and people in Colombia or Argentina, but we all have the same kind of nervous system, and we're all in the process of developing different parts of ourselves. And John, you mentioned two parts of ourselves, the humility and the confidence, but there are lots of other aspects of ourselves too. The great poet Walt Whitman said, I am large and contain multitudes. And so for you in your 20s, as well as up in your 30s and 40s too, you really want to develop that idea of containing multitudes in yourself and then begin to focus more in your 30s and 40s.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So first of all, I'm Brian. Very nice to meet you, and thank you for coming to talk to our class tonight. So on the subject of multitudes, I'm interested in the dichotomy between both happiness and sadness. So like in your book, you speak a lot about the thermostat, how we're programmed to feel only a certain amount of happiness before we trip a switch that brings us back down. So I guess I was curious how legitimate sadness, things like losing a loved one or a difficult layoff or losing a lot of money, how do those fit into your thermostat, and how do you best correct that thermostat when you encounter those problems like one after another?
Well, a lot of times, I appreciate you mentioning that aspect of it, because a lot of times traumas happen at the same time. You might have two or three things that are going on at the same time. And this is, right now, we're in a classic example of being in the midst of the pandemic and at the same time also handling lots of other things, racial unrest and things like that that are going on. And so it's super important for us to grow our bandwidth, the ability to handle more and more things of an emotional nature, to be able to handle more and more of that. And there's no better way to do that than simply to work on savoring more of the positive feelings in life, as opposed to just trying to get rid of the negative ones. That if you spend too much time trying to weed out the negative things, that can keep you from the positive growth that will make all those negative things absolutely irrelevant. You know, that a lot of us focus on, like I said in the book, you know, we inherit, we're a Learjet that we inherit, but we use it to plow potato fields on. You know, that instead of opening up and saying, what is my true genius? What is it that I'm really here to do? We settle for less. And so I think the main, you know, if there's any positive value from the current situation to be had, it's I think in allowing ourselves to really bottom out and feel the fear that's in the air and feel our anxiety and feel our neighbor's anxiety, and to open up and be more resonant with the world around us. Um, I always say peace of mind can only come through total participation. You can't withdraw from anything and have peace of mind. You have to participate with everything to have peace of mind. You have to participate with what's going on inside you and participate with what's going on in the street. You know, that we are social beings as well as being interior beings, that we need to thrive in a community. And so I think that one of the things that we're being called on to do now is to open up and acknowledge things in the community that maybe we've never acknowledged before. And so I'm hoping that this extreme situation I'm in and you're in and we're all in will cause us to open our hearts more and more to accept more of our own feelings and to accept more of what's going on around us in the world. Because out of that participation comes a kind of peace of mind that I don't think we can get any other way. I've been to Tibet. I rode my bicycle across Tibet. I've been to caves in Tibet and to monasteries in Tibet. And there's no place you can go to meditate away the things that are in this world. You know, we need to be out here participating with them. This is not a time to be in a cave, I don't think.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, I think, yeah, even though we're all forced to be apart right now, I think we're all finding interesting ways and innovative ways to connect because we have to. Like, we have to engage with what's happening. And so that kind of leads me to my next question. So you talk a lot about how we are in charge of what we think, what we feel, all of that. And that's absolutely true, 100%. But what happens when someone believes, like truly believes that they deserve the best, be it a love or relationship or career, but there are other external parties there, like significant others or friends or supervisors, who are not able or unwilling to help you meet those demands? Like, what happens when someone works really hard and wants so hard, so badly to attain it, but it's ultimately kept by an external other person who's just unwilling to relinquish that control?
Yes, well, I think that's a condition that most of us will face at one time or the other. Um, I know in my early life, I found, in a way, I had to bottom out in order to rebirth myself. Um, and I think that a lot of times we need to keep meeting adversity and finding different ways around and through, so that if there's no straightforward path through, you know, you may have to develop other ways of going around. Like, I remember in my university career, I had a dean that he and I just didn't see eye to eye. He'd been a Marine, you know, and he had his ways of being, you know, and I was sort of on the other end of things. And so, but I had to find ways of developing my own genius that sort of hot wired around political obstacles and that kind of thing. So my suggestion is, when you run into adversity, to use that as a cue to ask yourself even more deeply, what is my true genius? Let me find out if I can use this in service of my genius, use this adversariness in the service of my genius. If you keep asking yourself, how can I increase my genius time in this situation? A lot of times see, if you're here and another person is here, either they're going to come up to here or you're going to go down here or you're going to split. And sometimes you have to split in order to find the situation. I once talked to a guy literally that was a personnel guy that was brought in to make big personnel changes, and he had fired 10,000 people in his life. And he told me something amazing. He said that every time around the holidays, he gets showered with cards from people saying, "Thank you for firing me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." You know, because they used it as a way to find out a deeper level of their genius. I got fired from my first clinical job. I was terrible at it. I'm a terrible administrator. And I took on a job that I just should have never done in a million years. But fortunately, once I got out of that, I realized, well, that wasn't what I'm really good at. And I kept, changing my focus a little. So I think it's a process of experimentation that goes on way, way up into your 30s and 40s.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hendricks. My name is Augie Kesar. I'm a pretty avid cyclist myself, so it's pretty cool that you biked across Tibet.
I've written 3 bicycle tour books of Europe too.
Oh goodness. Okay, well,
you should see my knees. When they went in to replace my knee 5 years ago that I'd worn out from cycling hundreds of thousands of miles and playing squash and golf and everything. By the way, I'm getting visited here by a friend of mine who is interested in having her dinner here in the not too distant future. So she's come in to lobby me. This is Allie, who's one of our 2 British short-hair cats.
All right.
Yes, go ahead. I got off on a cycling analogy, but I want to hear your question here. I know we're getting a little tight on time.
No, yes, sir. So it seems like you're a pretty big athlete. I'm kind of an athlete myself. I mean, I enjoy riding bikes. I did triathlon in college. And I think a big part of what makes successful athletes is a lot of them, they play with a chip on their shoulder. And, you hear that said a lot as kind of a catchphrase that's thrown around, but it's basically this idea that they hold some kind of grudge or some kind of, inadequacy about themselves that drives them to, achieve greater and greater success. Even if you've won, the classic is obviously Tom Brady, who won, 6 Super Bowl or 5 or 6, I forget, Super Bowls. And, even after he won the first one, he still always found ways to continue motivating himself. And so you talk a lot about how these hidden barriers to success can kind of cast a shadow over a feeling of fulfillment and accomplishment that you should get when you are successful. And so my question is, how do you balance maintaining that competitive edge to continue achieving in your life with realizing, fulfillment in your success?
Yes. I've worked a lot with athletes. I was a professor at the branch of the University of Colorado that's near the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And so I spent 20 some years around where there were a lot of high-powered athletes. And one thing I found, and it touches on exactly the point you're making, I think, is a lot of them were being pushed from the past by some kind of event or inadequacy earlier in their life. I worked with a woman who, the story isn't important, but a famous mountain climber who suffered from asthma. And his way of dealing with his asthma was to exercise over the top of it and keep pushing it down. And yet you can only do that for so long. Your body gets back at you after a while. And I was going to say that when the doctor opened up my knee to replace it afterwards, he told me, as I was talking to him after I was out of it, he said, your knee looked like somebody poured battery acid in it. What have you been doing with your knees all your life? And I said, bicycle touring books, 20 years of being a competitive squash player, an avid golfer. You know, if my knees are down there at all, I'm grateful for them. But the point I'm making is that it's much better for your whole being to be pulled toward a positive future rather than pushed from a negative past. And so, if in your athletics or any other of your endeavors, you feel like you're being pushed from the past, like a drive to get even, or something that comes from back there, open up, love yourself for that, but get pretty soon on getting pulled to the future by something positive. I always ask people if they've ever been to Amish territory in Pennsylvania or Iowa or Ohio, where you see horses and buggies on the road still. And I say, have you ever seen a horse pushing a buggy? And nobody's ever seen that, because there's more power in being pulled toward the future than there is rather than being pushed from the past. As soon as possible, get the thing out in front of you that you're running toward rather than the thing you're running from.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like that analogy.
Thank you. By the way, I budgeted 45 minutes for this, and my wife is going to be appearing here shortly to use this office for another event. So I want to kind of wind down a little bit. I want to answer as many questions as I can, but I also want to be mindful of, I need to kind of clear out. She's teaching a class today. She's got 40 people in 6 different countries around the world that she's working with this afternoon.
Oh, well, I just want to thank you so much for your time and your insights and your experience. And I can't wait to listen to this again, because I kept writing down all of the things you were saying. You know, peace of mind comes from total participation, and there's so many takeaways here. And so these are our leaders. These are the people that I'm so excited that are on the front line right now. What would you tell them about their zone of genius?
I would say that as soon as possible, make a whole being commitment to spending more time every day in your genius zone. It comes from the power of your commitment. There are tremendous distractions in life. I mean, real big distractions that are there that are sort of keeping you from your genius zone. I mean, there's the pull of advertising trying to sell you stuff in the television, and the dramas of daily life, and all of those kinds of things that we have going on. But I want to implore you to treat those as distractions and keep your focus on expressing more and more of your genius every day, because it leads to a kind of a whole person excitement and joie de vivre that you can't really get any other way that I know of.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much. And I agree, because I've been living in my zone of genius and I love it.
Well, blessings upon you. And thank you so much for anchoring a course in these kind of ideas. The reason I quit being a university professor, by the way, is I got really tired of having to teach things that nobody needed to know. And so I told my wife when I quit being a university professor, I said, we're going to start our own private university that only teaches the things that people absolutely need to know in our field. I mean, you've got a different field there, but for us, the field of transformation and psychology and that kind of thing, and personal transformation and relationship transformation, that's our field. And so we want to only teach people things that they absolutely know that they need to do.
Yes, and that's why this leading from your zone of genius is so powerful and so transformative. Again, round of applause for Dr. Gay Hendricks. Woo, zone of genius.
I want to tell you all too, go to the Foundation for Conscious Living website, because there's all sorts of free resources there, breathing resources, all sorts of different things there that we have through our nonprofit foundation, the Foundation for Conscious Living. And then the rest of our work, the workshops and things, is at hendricks.com.
Wonderful. Thank you for those resources. All right, we're on it. You take great care, and thank you for all the work that you've put out in the world. We love your zone of genius. Keep doing it.
Thank you, Maura. Thank you, everybody.